Hello, welcome to APS 1049 Management Consulting for Engineers. This is just a 10-minute video to give you an overview of the course content, basically. And then there will be another further 2 videos in Module 0, which will provide a more detailed view of the whole course. So I'll just go to the modules. So the course this course is for practitioners. So this is a management consulting course for those who wish to go into a career in management consulting. For engineers, specifically it's tailored to engineers who wish to go into a career in the management consulting profession can be small firms or some of the big firms. And we're going to cover both the industry itself and the actual practice of management consulting and the skills that one requires to be a successful management consultant. So the course is basically 12 modules, the 13th module for your final project presentation. The course can be delivered over 13 weeks, 13 weeks, or it can be 100% online, or it can be the 10-day intense version, which are basically 10 half-days spread out over 3 weeks. With a 4th week for finalizing your project. So week 1, you're in the class from 9 a.m. till 12 noon, 5 days a week, and you're working in teams not around the clock, but at least a few hours in the evening for that first week. And then the 2nd week, you're outside the class and you would work on your projects there. The 3rd week, you're back in the class again from day 1 to day 5, from 9 a.m. till noon. And then the 4th week, you use that to wrap up your projects. So there's 3 versions, and so these modules can be applied and adapted to all 3 versions of this course. So the course has 4 parts. So just to place part 1 is placing management consulting in context. Part 2 is the consulting process and the stages, really the practice, what you do with clients. And then management consulting in various areas, with respect to the functions of management and also the industry sectors. You could be an industry management consultant across many functions, or you can be a functional management consultant across many industries. And you've got to also understand, as 7 says here, Module 7, the uniqueness of each client. Every client's unique, but the methodologies you apply are often similar. And then part 4, skills, the actual skills for success, the soft skills and the technical skills. So you've got to we're going to talk about ethical skills and creating value, etc. So let's go through each of them. Now again, it'll only be another few minutes in this video. So in Module 1, I'm going to give you an introduction to the management consulting profession. So a bit of the history of the development of it, some of the major firms in it. And the history goes back to the late 19th century. And it really grew out of the engineering profession. They were called management engineers. And then as the accounting profession began to formalize and work itself into professional practice, the accountants started to move in, cost accountants specifically. So typically industrial engineering, the rise of industrial engineering too in the 1920s, coincided with the rise of management consulting as well. But they were originally called management engineers. So we'll look at that history and where we are today, which is a global industry across all continents and in every sector. And it's grown enormously especially the last 40 years. So we'll put it into a bit of context. And in Module 2, we talked there about the actual types of consulting. The major distinction there is content consulting versus process consulting. Content consulting is where you're brought in for specific subject matter expertise. So for example, production scheduling, you may be an expert in production scheduling, you may be an expert in financial accounting. And that could, you could be brought in as a consultant in that, maybe IT systems as far as financial accounting is concerned, or as far as production management is concerned. And then there are various skills you have to have. You can have the skills of a coach, the skills of a facilitator, the skills of a leader, the skills of a change agent, the the technical skills, presentation skills, communication skills. Consulting relies much more on the soft skills than does engineering as a professional practice. Now, engineering management relies on soft skills, but consulting, management consulting, to differentiate it from other kinds of consulting, management consulting is very much you're expected to have hardcore technical skills in some area, but your big success factor will be your soft skills in order to the ability to get people to actually adapt the ideas and to make changes and so on. And then of course there's the cultural, you've got to be able to align with the culture that you're working in. So for example, just because you're a highly successful consultant, management consultant at the senior level, at C level, chief executive, chief operating officer level of an aerospace industry, for example, aerospace companies, does not mean to say you're going to be able to hack it in the banking industry or the financial services industry or indeed the government, simply because the cultures are very different and one has to adapt, a management consultant has to adapt one's stance and attitude and thinking to the local culture, in addition to having the technical skills. So it's rare for people who are industry type consultants, for example, specializing in healthcare, specializing in finance, that find their way into aerospace. That would be rare unless it was in a very highly specialized area, functional area, like let's say law. So a lawyer can be a management consultant depending on their mandate. And typical management consulting tends to focus on change. It's changing the status quo. You tend not to get hard to do technical work. And we'll talk about all this throughout the course. Module 3 focuses on the key ingredients to an effective consultant-client relationship and the psychology of that relationship, how you manage expectations at the C level, on the shop floor, in the front line, and management in the middle, how you work with teams, how you do your billing, your ethical behaviors and so on, how you transfer knowledge to the client, how you exit from the client from projects, how you terminate projects, when you terminate projects, how to say no, how to say yes, etc. How you market to clients, how you retain long-term clients. We'll talk about those things. In part 2, we talk about the specific stages. So this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where the rubber meets the road, you'd say. This is where you actually do the work. So in Module 4, we talk about how you enter a client for potential work. You haven't got the job yet, but you're meeting them. And you're sort of listening to what their needs are, and you're defining their needs. That's Module 4. And that's a make or break meeting. Depending on how there's chemistry issues, do they actually like you? Do they have confidence that you get the job done? How do you open the door? There are a group of people called rainmakers. These are the people that can open doors for the operational kind of consultants, the ones that actually do the work to get in there. So rainmakers are people that actually can open doors, executive doors, for companies to actually get an audience. And then 5 is diagnosis. How do you actually diagnose the issues that a client or a company is having? How do you go about data gathering and finding what their issues are, maybe some of the root causes up front, so that you actually can set the stage for implementation? You know what the solutions are. So diagnosis is looking at what the issues are, uncovering them, and then trying to come up with some solutions. And after that, that's typically when you give recommendations, and then you might be retained for implementation. Where the money is made is implementation. So diagnostics, I'm just going to say that anybody that has a long-term relationship with a client where it involves implementing the change, probably 10% of the fees are in the diagnostic phase, 90% are in the implementation phase, or 80, let's say 80-20, 20% in the diagnostic, 80% in the implementation, but it's up in that region. So real money is made when you implement, if you are inclined for implementation. Some management consultants are not interested in implementation. They might be older consultants who are semi-retired, that they're not really available to be involved with the client 4 or 5 days a week for 2 years. Or they they're diagnostic types that hand it over to others for the implementation. to help clients implement. We'll talk about those in module 6, and module 6 is the implementation. We'll talk about those in modules 5 and 6. In module 7, we look up at the uniqueness of each client. You've got to realize that if you're working in let's say, a large-scale media company or aerospace company, and it's thousands of employees, and then you work for a company of about 50 employees or 100, a small medium enterprise, or a family, specifically a family-owned enterprise, the cultures are so different and the needs of these clients are so different that you've got to tailor what you're doing for each of those companies. So you can't use big company approaches that you would use where there's 6,000 or 7,000 employees, let's say in an aerospace division. You can't use that same approach with a company where it's a family. So it's the father and mother and a brother and a sister, or two brothers and two sisters, and the complexity around family-owned businesses. These are completely different entities and require completely different psychology. The methodologies used, let's say if they're both manufacturing companies, the methodologies, the systems, etc., that you apply, the solutions that you adopt, yeah, they're very similar, believe it or not. But the way you adapt and apply them are completely different. It's simply because of the scope and the size of the businesses. So each client is unique, even though the solutions are common. Consulting in the functions, so basically we'll talk about operations and production, finance, human resource management, strategy, and IT systems. And of course there's a specialty area which I have particular depth in, and that's engineering management. So companies where engineering, design, and product development are a major part of their operation, that would be a very unique kind of expertise, and I'll talk about that. In fact, even in module 1, I'll talk about the transition from engineer to management, to manager to management consultant, because there's distinct skills that are different in each of those phases of development. Though your engineering education itself has a great foundation for management and then management consulting, it is just a foundation, and we'll talk about what those functional skills are that you get from an engineering education and from engineering practice. But there's an enormous amount of other skill sets that one needs to adapt and acquire in order to be successful in management consulting, or in fact internal management consulting or external, whether you work inside a company as a leading innovator or change agent, or you're brought in from the outside as a practitioner. Then we'll talk about the industry sectors, and there are many companies specialize in certain industries. Some are healthcare specialists, some are aerospace and defense, some specialize in pharmaceutical or consumer goods, and we'll talk about some companies. And then the skills for success, legal and ethical. I want you to know, and we'll talk about it in the next video, the more detailed overview, that there's a lot of scandal out there around management consulting. And that's why there's a professional institutes exist around the world where you get the only real professional designation, that's the CMC, the Certified Management Consultant designation, and it's in basically all countries and on all continents. And there is an international council, etc., that set standards, etc. And it's a formal educational program. You have to have a first degree in any subject matter, and then you take the professional program itself, or maybe an MBA, which might exempt you from some of the exams and some of the courses. But the ethical issues, it's a big field, and we'll hear stories about the witch doctors and rip-off artists and scam artists, and this is pointing fingers at companies like McKinsey. So people will, there's actually, you just Google it, there's a whole bunch of literature out there that says, is McKinsey evil? And did the management consulting profession and the people from the MBA schools, because they're very tied together, did they cause the collapse of the 2008 mess, etc.? Because many of them were from elite MBA schools. Many of them were, of course, investment bankers, but many had management consulting backgrounds. So there's a lot of scandal and accusations. Module 11, creating value for yourself and the firm. Like, how do you want to be a partner in a large firm and grow it? Or do you want to be your own niche boutique firm? We'll talk about the decisions that you can make for that, to do that. It's very lucrative if you stay in a large firm for 25, 30 years. Many of these partners, I think, are making over $1 million now. You'll never be able to do that in a small boutique firm unless you package your knowledge in a certain way, where you're giving seminars for $15,000 for 2 days or something, or more. But again, there are many ways to design your business itself, either as an employee or your own entrepreneurial venture and boutique, what's called a boutique firm. Then in number 12, we'll talk about actually managing your career. That's the sort of wrap-up module. So I'll give you some insight into my own career, some of the positive things that I have done, and maybe some of the pitfalls as a lessons learned, as a reflection. I'm still actively involved in the profession, though I took a few years out to build up a whole teaching portfolio, of which this course is one. But that was only for a period of 4 years actually, but I've since re-entered the management consulting practice because I simply enjoy it. Okay, so that's to give you an overview of the course. The project, I have recruited some of the big 6 firms. So for example, I would have PricewaterhouseCoopers and Deloitte on the kickoff. And down the road, I'm going to look at companies like KPMG and some of the professional practitioners in the Institute of Management Consultants and so on. So I'm going to have outside people involved. And our projects are going to be practice oriented. So they're going to be focused on the management consulting profession itself and the practice of management consulting. So a project could be, how has the internet or the web impacted management consulting? What's the latest, for example, some of the statistics and stuff that I use are from 5 or 6 years ago. So what's the latest in terms of the trends in management consulting today? Management consulting itself was really an Anglo-Saxon invention. It's really came out of the West, came out of the United States, Britain and the United States, specifically the United States. And of course, it's now spread. And what's happening in Asia, for example? Are there institutes there? How are they performing? Do they sell their knowledge back into the West? It's always been the West selling to the East. What's going on? Tata out of India have a management consulting practice in the West. Who buys from them and why do they buy from them? These are the kinds of projects that we could evolve. Okay, thank you very much. And that's the end of just this quick overview.